what we have seen is we have created these individual validators like TransactionValidator, InvoiceValidator, and ItemValidator. Now what we have to do is we have to combine all three of them and make sure that all of three runs in some form of sequence. Okay, but before that we'll try to write a main validator which will aggregate all three of them. So the way you can do that is let us call the class called as TransactionRequestValidator. All right, and of course this class would be injection point, and what we will do is we will aggregate all the validators over here. So we'll just do something like this: list of validator function validator functions, and we'll just use constructor injection. All right, and this dot validator function equal to validator function. Okay, now what we have to do is we have to combine all the validators and make sure that all of them are running properly. So the way to do it is write a validate method with transaction as an input, and just pass transaction to all the validators that are implementation of this particular interface, which is transaction validator, item validator, and invoice validator. So you can write something like this: validator functions dot stream dot map validator function dot apply that particular transaction. So now we are executing that particular validator over here. Apart from that, you just say that filter out like this, filter. So this validator function is going to return a list, right? It is going to return a list of error data. So if this list is not empty, which means the validation has failed, something is wrong with the request. So at that time we'll say that we are done with our validation and something is wrong with the request, we don't want to process anything more. So we would just say that error dot is empty, is not empty, and you would say dot find first, and or else get collections empty list, something like this. Okay, so now you would get this thing in a new field. Okay, let me write it down properly like this. All right, and if the error data is data dot, if it is not empty, then you can just say that throw new request validation exception error data dot to string. This can be any object that you want, but for simplicity, sake of simplicity, we'll just say request validation exception, and this can be a string of a list, right? So all the error data will be converted into string. So that's about it, right? So we have this, so let me show you, right? So we have a validator function, and we have implemented for transaction validator, the second was invoice validator, and the third one was item validator. Now the problem, we have a one very interesting problem, right? So if this is null, okay, and this is null, if transaction is null, then we'll say no transaction, right? Because no transaction was present, else we'll return empty list. So the problem is over here that when we inject all of these validations over here, right, when we inject all of this, the problem is that it can be injected in any order. It doesn't mean that transaction validator will be injected first, then invoice validator, and then item validator. It can be any sequence. So the problem with that sequence is, let's say that invoice validator is injected first, and we say dot apply, and we get the transaction object. And what if this object itself null, right? So dot invoice will fail with null pointer exception. So this is a bug in our code. So how can we really remove this bug in the code, right? So one way to remove this bug is just sequence this validator using order annotation. So you can say this should be executed first, okay, then we have to sequence the invoice validator as second, and we'll just say item validator, 3, right? So now we know for sure that transaction will be injected first, invoice will be injected second, and item validator will be injected third. So we won't run into any kind of those null pointer exceptions. All right. That being said, this is it for transaction request validator, right? Now we have written all the classes, validations, and everything, right? The next task is to write the unit test cases and validate our theory whether this code really works or not. So in next video, I will write the unit test cases, and we will write unit test cases without any kind of mocking or anything, and we will use simple dependency injection for unit test case also.